Good morning. Good morning. I just hope this talk is good enough to criticize. It's not clear to me that we're there yet. I think we have a lot to learn about the impact of technology, and we're going to look back 20 years from now, 30 years from now, wondering why we ever blocked cell phones and lots of other things that we're doing today that if we had historical perspective, we might not be doing. So, in the mode of we don't know what we're doing, tear these ideas apart, use what's useful and throw away the rest. And as I said, I just hope they're good enough to criticize. I was a high school teacher for 12 years, just to give you a reference. I started teaching on an island in Boston Harbor. It was a school for very bad boys. They did not go home at night. Residential, what we call a reform school. Do you have schools like that? Where the boys don't leave. And I lived on that island. And I taught oceanography and algebra, not in a flip model. And I was fascinated by the difference between teaching oceanography and algebra on an island. None of my students asked me any questions in algebra, although that's where they really struggled. But I would say, are there any questions? Oh, I was also the technology director in the high school where Ferris Bueller's Day Off was made. Did any of you see that movie? Ferris Bueller? Anyone? Someone? That movie. Okay, good. So I've had this weird life. Anyway, back to the island. But in oceanography, especially a unit on tides and currents, every student asked questions. They all were desperate for knowledge. And I learned, looking back, that was the escape unit on an island reform school, was oceanography, tides, and currents. So that's where they really wanted to know. So I've decided that if people are desperate, they're great students. Depends on how desperate you are. How desperate are you? Are you desperate? You don't look desperate. I wish you were desperate. So off we go. Let's see if I can make something work. By the way, I can't even use PowerPoint. It won't get out of presenter mode, so I have to use this edit mode today. All right. Let's see, can we get my screen on there? Can you do that? Yeah, okay. This is a quote. Eric Mazur is the dean of applied physics at Harvard. And when I first heard this, I thought, that can't be right. Because the whole idea of a teacher is to understand their content really, really well. But Mazur says, the more you know, the more expert you are about your content, the more difficult it is to understand the struggles of a first-time learner. Do you believe that? Does anybody in the room believe this? I mean, Ferris Bueller? Okay. I just have to tell you, I believe this. I believe this. And I've seen a lot of teachers teach flipped learning. During this talk, I am probably going to assume that you know some things that I know, and I will mess it up. I'll demonstrate this in front of you. But a few years ago, I was in Brisbane, and I was working with some kids. And we were looking at the time, it was early flipped learning, we were looking at some videos that explained the same thing their teacher had explained. And I asked the students here, a 12-year-old, I said, what's the difference between watching a video and listening to your teacher? And the students said, my teacher knows too much. Just like the opposite side of this quote from an expert. It was from a student here in Brisbane. And I said, what do you mean your teacher knows too much? Isn't your teacher supposed to know? And the student explained that the teacher explains things as if I understand them the first time and I don't. And the video has a rewind button, and my teacher doesn't have a rewind button. Do you believe that? That students, all students will not ask for help when they need it? So I think there are some basic flaws in the current system. And one of the flaws is that if you know too much about your subject, this quote, the other is, there's no rewind button, and the students who need our help the most are not as desperate as the students in my oceanography class on that island. They don't even know why they're learning some things. So let's just go through a simple model of flipped learning, just so you know what I'm thinking, because there are so many different definitions. You know, pick your own. So I'm picking this one just for the sake of all of us having the same general flow. General idea is students come more prepared to class. The problem with that is all students don't do that. So right from the beginning, we have a small problem, that all students do not watch these videos that are supposed to be available to them, although in many classrooms it doesn't matter. Even if the students haven't prepared, they're allowed to go off and sit in front and do it right there. The really big change that all teachers could do tomorrow without flipping is that theoretically, every student is asked to ask a question every day. Every student, every day, asks a question for homework. That is very different than the current homework. The current homework, you answer questions and come back with answers. But in the flip model, your homework is to ask a question. Now, this is a really big change. And by the way, the guy who I can figure out, I've tried to figure this out, who invented flipped learning, I think it is Eric Mazur at Harvard. Eric Mazur realized, more than 10 years ago, this is not a new idea, much more than 10 years ago, closer to 20 years ago, that even at Harvard, if you ask a class, do you have any questions, you don't get every student sharing their misconception and their confusion. They can't even articulate. Some students are so confused, they can't even begin to formulate a question. Fair enough? Is that a reasonable? His experience. So what he decided to do about 10 years ago is he basically invented Facebook. He did, by the way. Mark Zuckerberg's friends, the Winkle Twinkle twins, were in Mazur's physics class. Mazur invented Facebook, which is an irony that many schools are blocking it. He invents Facebook because he realizes that more students will ask questions online than face-to-face. He also thinks the most important information is not the knowledge of the subject that a teacher can have, but the questions of your students. That's the most important information in order to teach well. The questions of your students. Over the last 10 years, with a Facebook-like interface, some of you are probably using free services like Edmodo or other services like that. Eric Mazur has collected 4,500 questions in Introduction to Physics. 4,500 unique questions. He's cataloged them, he's tagged them. Is there anybody in this room who knows of a teacher who carefully, over the last 10 years, has collected all the questions of their students? In this room? Anyone? No one. Well, if Mazur were here, he would suggest that if there are teachers in this room, it's your students' questions that are the most important information you can have to figure out what to teach tomorrow. So right from the get-go, if you do nothing else, you might want to encourage all the teachers in your school to figure out some system. It can even be Post-it notes. It doesn't even have to be a technology solution. Just use Post-it notes and get every student to come into class every day with a question. That alone can have profound impact on how we organize our teaching. So, we study those questions. Major studies his questions of his students, and he figures out, okay, in the pattern of questions, how do we organize groups of students working together to debate the issues? What problems do I give in class that will get to the heart of the questions from the day before? Otherwise, how could you plan tomorrow? Would it only be the knowledge of the subject that would guide you? Would it be the same lesson plan you used last year on that day? How would a teacher know what to do if it isn't based on students' questions? This isn't a flip model. As I said, it's very social, students working together. You have these debates, very Socratic. I'll show you in a moment. But maybe Socrates was right. Maybe having a conversation with somebody else, hearing your voice out loud, defending your position and questioning, defending and questioning over and over and over again is a more powerful way to learn than what you're doing now, sitting there. So part of this is Socrates meets Facebook. Think of it like that. We're going back thousands of years to pick up an old idea and marrying it with a new idea that students are more willing to express themselves online than face-to-face. Combination of the two. Let me give you an example. I recently watched Mazur teach. He's always adding a new idea. What do you do after students take a test? What's the behavior of a teacher? The class has just finished. What do? Think about that. What Mazur does is all the students, as soon as they finish taking the test, they are in a group of 4 or 5 students. And the students get to take the test a second time immediately after they took it by themselves. But this time, the group votes on what's the answer. The group votes. So the group has to decide what is the answer to number 1. And in the group, there may be 2 or 3 different answers. Maybe they've all agreed. Maybe there isn't one correct person in the group on number 1, but they have to vote again as a group. And they vote. If they're right, they get a full point. If they're wrong, they get to do it again, and they only get a half a point the second time, and a quarter a point the third time. The fourth time, they don't get any points. And the 2 experiences of taking the test as an individual and taking the test in the group are added together. Your score is the combined score of your individual and the group. I watched this. I've never seen anything like this. The group goes through the exam immediately. The teacher doesn't have to correct it, by the way, because by the end of that, the students know all the answers. So it saves the teacher incredible amount of time, no correcting. All the research says you need immediate feedback. You don't want to correct it and give it back later anyway. It's against the way the brain learns. So you want immediate feedback. But the process of the group debating the answers, arguing and defending with one another is where the learning really takes place after the test. Mazur took the year off last year and traveled the world and found this in Indonesia. He was visiting a classroom without speaking the language. The kids were high-fiving one another all over this room in groups. And Mazur went over and asked the teacher, what are they doing? And the teacher said, they're taking a test. You ever seen kids high-five? during a test? It's not normal in my country. Usually it's very serious, head down, no one's high-fiving. But in the social interchange of the group coming up with the right answer, they will high-five one another and move on to the next one. Have any of you ever seen anything like this? Every exam, students debrief one another with a second shot immediately, where they have to debate every question on the exam. Incredibly different. No one in this room. So we don't have anyone who's asking students and cataloging all their questions, and we don't have anyone who's created this social interchange after every exam to debate the issues of the exam. I better stop now. Am I making any sense? Because I don't think I'm connecting with you. Am I? This okay? Is my attitude okay? A little rough. Telling you, do this, do that, do this, do that. I apologize for my American way. Yes?
It seems to work all right in a subject like physics or maybe maths.
Yes.
How would that work in English?
In English. How would that work in English? In English. In English. Okay. Let's say that I'm going to give you another idea, make it more complicated. Let's say that one day we're going to design exams that are so difficult that you get to use the internet to take the exam. Let's just say. Let's say that memorizing isn't the only way to prepare for a test. That one day we're going to break out of this paper-generated concept that you have limited information that you can memorize, and then you can feed it back. So let's just say, in English, we're going to design an exam where you can use the internet. Fair enough? Okay, let's say you're studying Romeo and Juliet. And let's say we teach kids to use Google. And I type in file type, PPT, and site : edu, and Romeo and Juliet. Does Juliet have one T? I don't know. Romeo and Juliet. And am I off the web? I'm off the web. Well, it will. A lot of kids have never seen a search like this. Just to tell you what this search does, file type is a Google operator, site is a Google operator, so that will give me PowerPoints on Romeo and Juliet, but only at universities. Fair enough? And if I change edu, here, watch. I change edu to ac.uk. That will only give me higher education in the United Kingdom on Romeo and Juliet. So the exam, in this case, is to take a look at PowerPoints from 2 different cultures on Romeo and Juliet, which I can show you if the internet were working, and remix them into the American view of the interpretation of Romeo and Juliet and the British view of Romeo and Juliet. It's kind of dueling PowerPoints. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That one. And the kids have to demonstrate in the amalgam of the remixing that they understand the 3 main characteristics of Romeo and Juliet: ethos, pathos, and logos. How's that? How's that? Pardon? Say what? Yeah, how would the students mark that? That's right. So, in the ownership, in part of the flipped learning, there's a really big question, maybe the biggest one of all: who owns the learning? Right? So there's this massive shift from the teacher managing learning. See, in this model, the traditional teacher might go home and make a PowerPoint on Romeo and Juliet and show the PowerPoint the teacher made to the whole class. This concept is You don't make the PowerPoint. The kids look at 10 PowerPoints from different cultures on Romeo and Juliet, remixing and maybe adding some slides of their own. So they're doing the heavy lifting rather than the teacher, right? And so the rubrics of assessment, what's the demonstration of logos, ethos, and pathos, let's just say, are clearly defined and agreed upon by the class in advance. So the assessment has to be crystal. The rubrics. Yeah, that's my quick off-the-cuff shot. And I will, I don't know, do you know, there are these new apps in English where the book is in the app and the kids are reading and they annotate and they highlight within the app. Do you know these apps? And like Subtext, there would be one, Subtext. And in Subtext, the teacher gets all the annotations of all the students in a pattern. She gets all the highlights. She knows where kids have gone in and asked questions. She knows where they've put resources within the context of the novel they're reading, because it's on the app of Subtext, and the teacher has all this information about the experience while the kids read the book. Well, without an app like Subtext, that's almost impossible to do. So in that regard, the teacher's getting a lot more information about students, as in asking questions in physics, but it comes from their annotation and resources while they're reading the book. And without an app like that, you can't do that. So there's all kinds of opportunities. I think the basic idea, I'm ripping off from John Hattie, it's to make thinking visible. Whatever we can do to make thinking visible is the general concept. And who owns the learning? Okay, great question. That was a great question. I don't know if I answered it, but I liked your question. So who owns the learning? Did that. Apply knowledge in a new concept. I just want to define learning. Learning doesn't mean you get to repeat something exactly as you were given. Learning means you can apply it in a different context from where you learned it. Let's use that as a definition of learning. With that definition, lots of things change. In fact, yesterday, maybe I'll give you, I'm going to go past that. I'm running out of time quickly. So the basic question is also who should work harder in a classroom, teachers or students? By the way, I've done this poll just to save time. In the United States, when you do a poll and you ask that question, in my country, about 80% of our teachers say they work harder during class than their students. My country. I don't know what it would be here. 80%. And then you say, who should work harder? And it's 90-10. Students should work harder. Teachers just line up saying, I'm working harder now, but students should be working harder. And so the real problem, I think, that flipped learning responds to is this problem of who's suffering the most. And I think we should make kids suffer more. And I say that in a glib way, you know, because I think they'll enjoy it if they suffer more. And maybe I want to give you a poll. I'm going to do this in a moment. With flipped learning, one of the things that you do in some teachers' classrooms is you do a lot of immediate quiz. You don't wait for the test on Friday. You just are constantly having interactive devices, whether it's a cell phone, an iPad. You know the routine. So I'm going to give you an experience. I'm going to pick physics. Are you all familiar with a photo like that? Do you know why the tracks curved around like that? It's a problem called thermal expansion. In thermal expansion, when you heat up steel, it expands. It actually expands in every direction. Every molecule in the steel heats up, it gets excited, the molecules start vibrating faster and faster, they want to get away from each other, and they try and do that, and you get a mess like that. You get a railroad track that's no longer usable because they forgot to put in the clickety-clack sound. They forgot to put in the gaps in between the rails. They tightened it up when they put in that railroad, no gaps. Do you know why there's gaps? So that rails can expand and they don't buckle out like that. How did I do? Did I explain thermal expansion? Any questions? Does everybody understand thermal expansion? Think of yourself as being a little molecule in the steel. You start vibrating. You want to get away from your neighbor in all directions. Okay. So I'm going to go. Let's see. You know what? The network's down. So it may not work so well with the network's down. I was going to ask you this question, and you were going to give me feedback immediately right now to see if you can apply it. Now, the key is I'm not asking you about railroads. I'm asking you about another shape, a rectangle piece of steel with a hole drilled through the center. It's not the same problem, different problem. Too many teachers give the same problems that were given in homework on the test, or something like it. This is a different problem. But it should test whether you understand the concept, whether you can apply knowledge. So, what happens to the diameter of the hole? Does it stay the same? Does it get bigger, get smaller? A plate, rectangular plate, round hole in the middle, very simple, heats up. Can you vote? Is it working? If you have a cell phone, +61. If you have Twitter, @poll, pick an answer. But I'm concerned that the internet's not working, which worries me, because we were going to do this, and you were going to fail miserably. And I was going to show you how little you can do this. But now I can't because we don't have internet. Okay, I'll tell you what. Turn to your neighbor. Give your neighbor the answer, and then if the neighbor has a different answer than you, everybody write down your own answer, so you're not going to be influenced by your neighbor. Pick one, right? And then find somebody around you who has a different answer and debate why is it different. You could do that even without the poll. I'll give you 5 minutes. Do you talk to each other here? You do that. Disconnected. Oh, well. What? Say it? Yeah. 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 What do you think?
The only one I can suggest you do is try the BCSE link.
This one?
Yep. It's a little slow. That's the general one.
You can't give me the Xerox high performance, can you?
Beg pardon?
Xerox? Those guys know what they're doing.
It's probably their own personal. So we've got a hardwired link there, but you can't plug it in.
Yeah.
We don't have a high bandwidth link specifically dedicated to work.
Yeah.
BCSE link, that will work.
Yeah.
Maybe a little slow first.
Yeah, let's see.
There's no passing on it.
Yeah. Okay. So you talk to a neighbor. I'll tell you what. I may be on now. Can someone try to use Twitter to vote? That's usually a fast way to do it. You just type in @poll and one of these numbers. So if you think it's going to increase in size, go to Twitter, type in @poll, here, @poll, and a space, and one of those numbers, your cell phone, that way. I just know it's just going to, oh, we're going. Oh, we're going. We're going. Yay. Go team. Okay. Well, it's too bad I didn't have that working before you chatted with one another. Increases, stays the same, decreases. We'll wait. Now, I have watched Eric Mazur at Harvard come with video, diagrams, molecular models of atoms vibrating. I mean, he has shown every possible trick of explaining thermal expansion. I have sat in his class and watched this. And you did about as well as Harvard students who get an expert explaining thermal expansion. In the interest of time, 22% of you got it right. The right answer is the worst score in this room. Now, maybe I didn't explain thermal expansion. Maybe you didn't understand that the railroad tracks were not laid that way, but expanded and buckled. And maybe you didn't understand that there's atoms. And I don't know what part of it you didn't understand, but I think we do know what's happening. Learning, it depends on your definition of learning. If your definition is simply repeating what a teacher said, let's agree now, that's not learning. Learning is applying knowledge to a new question after the concept has been covered. By the way, all of you have basically used a piece of metal with a hole in the middle of it in an experience you have had with thermal expansion. What is that experience that probably everybody in this room has had? And if you had thought about it, you'd know the answer. Pardon? Watching a donut being cooked? How often do you do that? Watching a donut. No, I'm going to come up with, maybe you do, but that's not it. It's a jar in the refrigerator doesn't open, and you put it under hot water. Does anybody have that experience? Half this room. And then you can open the jar. That's thermal expansion. Because the atoms are moving in every direction, the whole thing expands. Remember I said, every direction, every atom, the whole thing expands. The circle gets bigger. Does anybody believe what I just did? All right, now, so I think what we've demonstrated, and maybe I'm not such a good physics teacher, but I think we have a problem. And I think the problem is we haven't really defined learning well. And the real trick are the questions the teacher asks. So it's really about teaching by questioning. It's understanding the students' questions. And now I should give you yet another problem and walk around the room and listen to you debate with your neighbor while you're trying to figure out yet another application of thermal expansion. Okay, we'll move on. We'll just keep going. Applying knowledge in a new context. So let me just kind of run through some other aspects. I think what's really misunderstood about flipped learning is it's all about teachers making videos and homework in class. That's an oversimplification. It's much more complex than that. it turns out that punishment, did you ever see Summer Heights High? You ever see that? Oh my gosh, that's an outrageous, is that what Australia looks like, by the way? I mean, is that represent, anyway, that's on HBO in my country. You're exporting some pretty weird stuff, I might tell you. Okay, Summer Heights High. You go in, what's the guy's name? Jonah? Jonah. So Jonah's in a class, and inevitably he gets thrown out, right? Which is just what he wants. He has the attention of the teacher. It's on him. Oh, my God, can he manipulate a teacher? Do you know what I'm talking about? Jonah in Summer Heights High. I should show the video. Okay. In a flipped classroom, Summer Heights High would never get off the ground. You wouldn't see that behavior. Because it turns out, if you heard Dan Pink yesterday, punishing people over and over and over again doesn't get you very far. Turns out, probably Dan Pink was right. So one of the things that is fantastic about flipped learning is it abolishes a tremendous amount of punishment. You're no longer punished for not doing homework. You're no longer marked down for not doing homework. In Mazur's model of the social interaction of an exam, it's a group responsibility that's shared. And you don't feel that an individual is being punished. You're more part of the team. It's a completely different feeling around being corrected. Almost just getting rid of a tremendous amount of punishment, which we've known for a very long time, but too many schools persist at punishing kids for not doing well. I have 5 minutes. Let's see what might interest you. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. Did that. Did that. Keep going. There's the, okay, this one. This is a student-generated tutorial. One of the arguments I have with teachers is teachers think they have to create all the videos. And they work deep into the night, screencasting and creating videos, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, the research says kids want to learn from kids. Let the kids make the videos and build your library up over time. So if you want to see one, very quickly, if I went to mathtrain.tv, just to show you what a video might look like that a student did. Here we go. Let me just play a little bit of that.
Prime number is when a number is only divisible by 1 in itself. 32 is composite, meaning that it is divisible by more than the numbers 2 in itself. So 32 is divisible by 2 and 16. Now we are going to keep going. And we see that 2 is a prime number. It's only divisible.
So the argument I have with teachers all over the world is teachers feel
I'm going to write out all of the 2s.
That they have to do all the work of making all the videos. In fact, finally, I can convince some teachers by showing them this, that, wait a minute, let's empower the children, because children will tell me, if you have to teach something, then you really learn it. I've had lots of kids tell me that. I didn't really learn anything with homework, but when my teacher told me I had to make videos for the rest of the class, then I got serious and really started to learn. I don't know if you believe that or not, but that's what lots of kids have told me. So I'm going to have to wrap up, right? What do I have, 1 minute? 2? 2 minutes, okay. In the scheme of things, I think the biggest hang-up initially, for those of you who are going to start out getting rid of punishment and focusing on students' questions and having a lot more Socratic exchange and designing questions that test concepts, many teachers feel that they're not really teaching anymore. And in fact, kids might even tell a teacher, you're making us do all the work, you're not teaching us. And you have to survive the first 2 weeks of children who might complain that the teacher's not teaching, who have been conditioned year after year after year, that their job is to be passive and the teacher is the one who should be working harder than the class. So this initial change in the culture of children working harder can absolutely meet with some resistance. Weather it. Stay the 2 weeks. Your students will be grateful to you that you've empowered them to be working harder than they traditionally have, with much less punishment and much more social engagement. I think it's an amazing time to be alive. And just to show you some resources, if I jump down, just to conclude, 'cause I should give you some resources of how to keep learning beyond today. Let's see. We'll get rid of that. The hashtag FlipClass is an amazing hashtag. Follow FlipClass. Every day you can learn about teachers sharing strategies for flip learning all over the world. How many of you are on FlipClass? Well, the rest of you, if you want to really learn this stuff, that's probably the single best source I know, is that hashtag. This Ning, flipclassroom.org, is an amazing community of teachers sharing videos and resources and how do you get questions and design your lessons. So that's an amazing Ning. You can keep learning on that community. Some tools that are very powerful for managing the data. Show and share from Cisco. ed.ted.com. If you've never seen that, free website, go this afternoon. And coming in September is an app called Verso that's going to allow teachers to manage all the questions and understand how to design assignments. That's coming in September. There we go. It's a wrap. Thanks, guys.
Round of applause for Alan November. Start with it, Alan. We've got time for a couple of questions.
Questions.
A couple of questions.
Questions.
Okay, we've got our two microphones down the front. We've got our roving mic people here up in the orange. Hand up and they'll come to you, or you're welcome just to come to the microphones down here. Alan, I'll kick off. We've got one down the front, right down the front here. Just before we get to that one, we heard a lot yesterday about taking responsibility for your own learning. Flip learning, a classic example of that.
Yep.
Good, nice short answer. Just down the front here. Hang on, just down. We'll just get the microphone to you. Number 4. Just your name and your question.
First of all, thank you very much. With creating, like the videos, students creating videos, until what age can that be taken down?
Kindergarten.
Kindergarten?
Yeah, in kindergarten, if you had an iPad, there would be an app called Screen Chomp. Little crayon design. Children can take out crayons, make videos on the alphabet, on language, on numbers. Oh my gosh, when you take 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds and teach them how to design content to help other children learn, they think it's a game. We should start quite young. Yeah, huge fun at that age.
Another question, number 1 over here.
Hey, at what point in the teaching and learning process would that video with the factorization come from?
That's, in my country, those children are 12 years old.
Okay, but is it after the unit on factorization has been taught by the teacher?
Here, I'll show you. It happens to be a friend of mine. He's a client. This is Los Angeles. By the way, he has the highest test scores in the district. It's not even a fair fight. So just to show you, it comes off a website he built called MathTrain. If I type in anything I need to know, it's the entire library of every problem in the course. So this particular one, I type in factor. I get a bunch of different videos. Just to give you a reference point, that video has been seen 56,000 times. How many teachers have answered the same question 56,000 times? Kids need to learn over and over and over again. Boy, does this save the teacher time. Why would you even introduce a concept when you have an entire library of all the mechanics and basics of a subject like mathematics? Then you can go to the application level. What's the equation of a car accident, with a skid mark on the road? That's an algebra problem. Focus on that kind of stuff. Leave this to the kids. I don't think any teacher should be introducing factoring. Uh-oh.
No, another question. Another question over here, Alan. Number 1.
I'm not provoking anybody. This is not fair. You're taking away my fun.
Jump in, number 1. Now.
Hello, John from Kingston from Irimple.
Where are you?
Yeah.
Oh, hello.
Hello. You defined learning in a sentence. Could you please reiterate it again?
You know, the reverberation. Did you understand
Sorry?
the question?
I didn't hear that question.
Can you please redefine learning? You gave
Learning
it in a sentence.
is the ability to apply the knowledge in a different context than where it was taught. And when you look at study after study after study, outside the classroom, like the skid mark on the road, kids don't even know that's an algebra problem. They wouldn't know. Depends on, that's my definition for this workshop.
Round of applause for Alan November, everyone. Thank you
good?
so much, Alan.
Yay. All good.
Well done.
Can I take my toys?
You can take your toys with you. That's absolutely. I won't commandeer those at all. Great way to kick off the day. Obviously, always a lot of energy with Alan. He's one of the hardest guys to MC with because he answers questions and you can see he's thinking about some follow-up there. His brain's shooting off in all different directions and then he starts again and then he starts again. So he's very difficult to MC for, but